Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. Amen. A couple of you are good. First of all, I just wanted to say it's always a pleasure to be here. It's been our pleasure, my wife and children, at least two of our children, to be here with you for the last several days. And if, just in case there are those that this is the first service you've been in since we've arrived, I just want to quickly point out to you the pretty lady over there in the green top. That is my wife, Beth. And so I'm glad she's with us. This is her first time there here. I had almost decided that in lieu of the fact, or in view of the fact that we are approaching Yom Kippur, that I might talk about Yom Kippur, but as I was just meditating this morning, I feel like Father has directed me to do something else. And so, with that in mind, I want to pray, and then we'll proceed. Our Father in heaven, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we do thank you, Father, for this time that you have allotted for us to be here and to fellowship with the folks here at Freedom Baptist in Amarillo. And I just thank you for the pastor and his wife, and for the elders, and for those that work so very hard to make us feel welcome and to be generous and hospitable to us. And thank you for all the wonderful people and friends that we've met and over the years, and the relationships that we're developing. Now, Father, I just pray that you will help me this morning to share with them what they need for today. I pray that you will grant unto us our daily bread, not just that physical bread that we place in our bellies, but the bread that comes from heaven. So help me, Father, to be alert, and to be sober-minded, and to faithfully represent your word here this morning. I pray that you will give me the clarity of mind to share what I feel that you've spoken to me, and to present it in a way that is clear and meaningful and challenging. But above all, we just pray that your Spirit will be here with us, that your Spirit will reside in us, among us, work in us, work through us, challenge us, and impart unto us that word that you have for each and every one of us. And for these things we pray and believe in the name of our Messiah and King Yeshua. Amen and amen. All right. Now, let's go to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis 2, verse 1, Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished, or ended, or completed. And on the seventh day, God ended, or finished, his work which he had done. He rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. God blessed the seventh day. He sanctified it, because in it he rested from all of his work which God had created and made. And then it goes on from there. All right, so we're going to, as is my custom, I'm going to look at a couple of Hebrew words here and kind of explore a few things. And the first word we're going to look at is the one that is translated finished or ended. And that root word is kala. Now, if I had my board here, I could write it in Hebrew. Not that everybody would know what I was writing, but nonetheless, the Hebrew root word is kala. If I were to spell that in English, it would be K-A-L-A-H. And it means what it says, to stop something, to bring it to an end, to finish it. And in this case, it was the work that God had been doing on day 1 through 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Here's why I want to address this. Because day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, even though each of those days had a specific purpose. For instance, day 1 is when we see light. Day 2 is when he hammers out the firmament, dividing the waters above from the waters below. Day 3 is when he gathered the seas together into one place. Dry land appeared. He called forth all the vegetation. Day 4, the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, day 6, man is created. But day 6, or any of the days before, are not the culmination and not the capstone of creation. It's the Shabbat. It's the seventh day. And that's the day that he blessed and he sanctified and he set it apart. And that's the day that we commemorate, or should have been commemorating ever since then, as a memorial to the fact that on the seventh day he rested from the work that he had done. Now, that doesn't mean that the work that he put into day 1 through 6 stopped, because we know the sun comes up every morning. The moon comes out at night. In seasons, the vegetation grows, it withers away, and then it's restored in spring. We can see the stars at night. We can observe all these things that he's created. And so they didn't cease to be. It's just that the work that he placed into it stopped so that other things could begin to occur. Now, I'm sure that most everyone here is familiar to some degree or another with the distinctions between linear thought and cyclical thought. And if you're not, let's cover all of our bases. A lot of us were taught in times past, and especially when we're looking at eschatology, prophecy, anything like that. There's gentlemen who teach prophecy, and they'll stand in front of a big chart, and on this end of the chart will be the creation and Adam, and then we'll come on down the timeline, and we'll have Noah, the flood, and we'll come on down the timeline, and there'll be the days of Abraham, the covenant he made with Abraham. We come on down to the time of Moses and Israel coming out of the wilderness, coming out of Egypt into the wilderness and going on into the land and the conquest of the land and the days of the judges, and we come on down to the time of David. And then when we get over here somewhere in the timeline, there'll be a big cross. Remember? And everything over here before the cross is all blood, guts, and gore, and Old Testament and law and all those kinds of things. And then on this side of the cross we have the church age and grace and love and peace and harmony and all those kinds of things, until we get to the end times when everything's just a big mess. All right, that's linear thought. That's what we're trying to describe here. Linear thought, which is very similar to evolutionary thought. That, we have a big bang, and then we have everything's in water, and then you have this little amoeba that develops into a man. And if some of you know Brad Scott, he does a great demonstration here. I'm not going to attempt that. It's quite funny, actually. But the point is that the Bible doesn't teach us linear thought. It doesn't teach us evolutionary thought. It teaches us to think in cycles. Because right now, we're in the fall feast. We're headed into the fall. And after fall will come winter. And after winter will become spring. And spring will become summer. And guess what? A year from now, we'll be going back into fall. And so everything is to be understood cyclically. When we want to know what the time is, we'll look at our watch. And we'll see what time it is. And notice that when we look at our watch, the second hand, or the minute hand, or the hour hand doesn't move across the face of our watch in a line. It moves in a cycle, right? And so when the second hand ticks off 60 seconds, that's the end of one cycle. And what happens at the end of that cycle? Another one begins. And at the end of another 60 seconds, we have the end of one cycle, but simultaneously we have the beginning of another cycle. And so on until we get to 60 minutes. And 60 minutes makes an hour. But at the end of that cycle is the beginning of another cycle until we start calculating time in days and weeks and months and years and centuries, etc. But again, my main point here is that we need to understand things move in cycles. And so where Genesis chapter 2 and the seventh day is concerned in the context of our conversation, the seventh day couldn't come about until the previous 6 days had ceased. As important as day 1 through 6 were, especially in the creation account, even though they all serve their unique purpose, we can't have the seventh day until all the things of the previous days cease and desist. And remembering that the seventh day, not day 1 or 2 or 3, 4, 5, or 6, but day 7, that's the capstone of creation. That's the culmination. That was the objective. And so we can't have the goal. We can't have what was always intended to be unless something stops. And all the things that were preceding that cease and desist. In fact, the word, and he rested, is the word that's spelled in Hebrew, Shin Bet Tav. Shabbat is the way it's pronounced here, but it's the word Shabbat. And if you were with us yesterday afternoon, you remember we wrote these words on the board, Shin Bet Tav, and how the Shabbat is a sign between these people and him. And so it says that he ceased and desisted from all that work that he had done. But again, my main point this morning is you can't have the Shabbat unless all those other things cease and desist. We can't have the goal and the capstone and the objective unless we're willing to allow all the other things that preceded to cease and desist. And so, if you have one cycle, we can't just stay in that one cycle. We just can't stay in that one place. Because if we determine that, I like it here in this first cycle, you know what that means? Whatever's supposed to unfold in the second one can't happen. Or whatever is supposed to happen, in the next phase of our life can't happen if we want to remain and stay right where we are. The point is this: some things have to stop. Some things have to cease if what the Father has intended for the next phase is going to unfold. And so what happens so many times in our lives is we decide, I like it here, it's warm, it's cozy, it's comfortable, it feels safe, it's familiar, and I don't want to go anywhere. It would be like a baby that's been in its mother's womb for those 40 weeks that decides, I don't want to come out. I want to stay right here. I like it here, it's warm, it's cozy, it's familiar, it's safe. I like it here and I'm not going anywhere. What happens to that child? I realize this is theoretical, but what happens if that child decides, I don't want to come out? It's going to die. And so there are things that God has ordained that serve a purpose. Whether we want to look at this on a national scale, global scale, an individual scale, the life of a fellowship, there are things that God uses and they serve a purpose then and there. But there's also a time when certain things have to cease and desist for what He has ordained later to unfold. I hope I'm making sense here. But again, one cycle ends, and it has to, for everything that's in the next cycle to begin to unfold. Now, there's an interesting thing here in Hebrew, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. And it's the word that means to finish or end. And as I shared with you, I were to spell that in English, it would be K-A-L-A-H, kalah. It means to stop. It means to cease, to desist, or to finish. But there's a very similar word. In fact, it's a family word. And it would also be pronounced kalah. It would just be spelled in English K-A-L-A. Leave off the H. So it's related to the word that means to finish or to end. But this particular word, kalah, means to imprison. And it's related to the idea that we find in Leviticus 19 and in Deuteronomy, where God says, if you have a field, you're not supposed to sow mingled seed in that field. And that Hebrew term that's translated mingled seed is kilagim, and it comes from this root word kalah that means to restrict or to impede or to imprison. The greatest example I can think of this concept is the parable of the wheat and the tares. God sows, or the owner of the field sows good seed in his field. Of course, that's wheat. But what does his enemy come and do? He comes and sows tares, a different type of seed, or a mingled seed in his field. And the whole idea of the tare being sown in the midst of the wheat is to restrict, to impede the growth of the wheat. To imprison it is really what it means. To put it in prison so that it won't continue to expand. And so this is what happens when we are trying to hold on to things that the Creator is saying to let go of. There are things that God has used in our lives, in our fellowship, that, again, have served a purpose. But then there comes a time that's got to stop. This time, or this season, or this cycle is coming to a close, and we've got to be willing to let go of it if we're going to see the fruition of what God has prepared in the next cycle, or the phase of our individual life, or the life of our fellowship. But when we allow, or when we decide to hold on to things, that opens the door for the adversary to sow the tares that will restrict, that will impede what God has intended, that will kind of keep us in prison. An example that comes to mind, if Messiah had allowed it to happen, was when he was talking about his impending death, burial, and resurrection. And if you'll recall, upon hearing this, Peter says words to the effect, "This is not going to happen. As long as I'm around, this is not going to happen." Now, Peter now is one of Messiah's disciples. But do you remember what Yeshua told him? He said, "Get behind me, Satan. Because you're thinking the way a man thinks, not the way God thinks." And I'm paraphrasing that. In other words, if Messiah had listened to Peter and thought about it and meditated upon it and embraced what Peter was saying, then what doesn't happen? So what Messiah is indicating to us is that this ministry and everything that I've been doing for these 3 years, 3.5 years, 70 weeks, whatever you listen to and whatever you believe there, the point is his ministry served a purpose. Going about, doing good, healing people, feeding the 5,000. All these different things served a purpose. However, if he doesn't go to the tree, and if he's not crucified, if he's not buried in the tomb, and if he's not resurrected on the third day, then what good would have him walking on water? What benefit would I get from that? What good would it be for me that he fed 5,000 with loaves and fishes if he had not been crucified, if he had not been resurrected on the third day? And so all of that part, or those components of his ministry, had to come to an end. Why? So that the greater purpose could begin to unfold. And so in a sense, it's like this. Something has to die so that it can be resurrected. I have to be willing to die to myself as an individual so that what God wants to do in me, so that he in me can be resurrected, so that I can truly fulfill what he has called me to do. We have to be willing to die to ourselves so that he can live in us and through us. And fellowships have to be willing to die to this or to that if what God has ordained is going to be fulfilled in them. I hope it's okay for me to say this, but I'll do it anyway because I'm leaving this afternoon. As far as I'm concerned, what I perceive in this congregation and where I see the pastor is being led and the elders being led, that would have never happened if men and women had not had the courage to let go of things of the past. Because there's a lot of people across America and the world who, because it's safe, comfortable, familiar, this is what I'm used to, and they want to hold on to that, you know what? Their congregations are dead or dying. And what God had purposed, perhaps, and ordained to fulfill in them will never come to pass because they're wanting to stay in that cycle. They're not willing to let those things come to an end. That, what God intends in the next phase of this to unfold. And so again, and I want to commend you, I want to commend the pastor and his wife and all the elders here, that the good things that are happening in this fellowship and congregation, and I will say, in time, God will bring it to pass that it will affect this community. It would have never happened if someone had not been willing to have the courage to let go of things of the past so that God could allow what he wanted to unfold for the future. It's not just a church that this applies to. It's each and every one of us. For things to be resurrected, for things to be raised up, there have to be those who are willing to die to the things of the past. Not that those things of the past didn't serve a purpose. They did. As a matter of fact, some of those things of the past will continue to show up in our lives. In fact, we'll build on those things. But we won't stay there. We'll proceed. Is that making sense to you? I'm glad it made sense to a couple of them. Good. All right. Let's go to Psalm 23. And we all know this. Well, let's read it. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not lack or shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. Sometimes. He leads me beside the still waters. Sometimes. He restores my soul. He also leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The word path is not the kind of path that we typically think of, because we typically think of a path that it starts here and it takes a turn there and it turns back over that way and it goes over that hill and it goes down into that ravine and it comes up here. That's not the idea of this Hebrew word. The word here is actually the same word where we get the term Gilgal. You ever heard that term before? At Gilgal, it says that is where the reproach of Egypt was rolled off of Israel. That was when they were coming out of the wilderness and were about to go into and possess the land. And remember, one of the first things they had to do, the men, they had to circumcise themselves. And that's where the reproach of Egypt was rolled off of them. Rolled off of them. Because the root word for Gilgal means to roll, or something that moves in a circle, or something that moves in a cycle. Here's why I'm telling you that, because that's the same root word that is translated here as path. In other words, it's not a straight path, it's not a curving path like this and is going about like this. It's a cycle. He leads me in cycles of righteousness for his name's sake. And sometimes he takes me in this cycle and I learn this. But when I finish that cycle, guess what? Another cycle begins. And I learn something else that's building on what I learned before. And then he leads me in another cycle. Or we might use this term, seasons. Have you discovered in your life that there are seasons of your life when you feel like everything's going well, you feel like you're maturing in the faith, you're not dealing with a lot of stuff, but then you'll come into a season and it seems like everything that could go wrong is going wrong. Everybody hates you, everybody's turning against you, everybody's getting mad at you, this is going wrong, that's going wrong. That's usually when we say, "Where are you, God?" Well, he's my shepherd, isn't he? So what does he do? He leads me in cycles of righteousness. And why does he do it? For his name's sake. Or let me put it this way. For his glory. So when he leads me beside the still waters, we love that. When he causes us to lie down in green pastures, we love those seasons. We like those cycles. But he also leads us in these cycles of righteousness that are for his name's sake. And so David says in the very next statement, yes. Or let's put it this way. In fact, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So not only does he make me to lie down in green pastures in that cycle, and not only does he lead me beside still waters in that season, but sometimes he leads me through the valley of the shadow of death. Why? Because he's my shepherd. And he leads me through these cycles of righteousness. For what? For his name's sake, that he might be glorified. And so I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. Literally what it says is, because you stand with me. In my mind's eye, I like to see it as He's standing by my side, leading me through all of this. That is, if I'll focus on that. And so you are with me. Your rod, anybody remember what that word is? Shevet. Shevet. A rod, a scepter. And remember, it's synonymous with the word shin bet tav, Shabbat, to cease or desist, or Shabbat. All right? So your rod and your staff, what do? Comfort me. Okay? So how does a shepherd use a rod and a staff? Here's my understanding. Sometimes he'll take that rod and he'll poke a sheep in the rump and sting them really hard. And why does he do that? It might be because they're just wanting to hang around right here because they like it. This is a nice place. I don't want to go anywhere else. I just want to settle down right here. That's not where the shepherd's leading them. It might serve a purpose then and there, but there comes a time he has to take that rod and go whack, get moving. And it stings. We brought our dog along with us on this trip. She's part lab and part retriever. And so somehow or another it became my job every morning to take her, out so she can do what she needs to do. And there's a daily battle between me and Marley about who's going to lead. Because I feel like this, and I'm pulling back on the leash, trying to get across her. No, I'm setting the pace here. I'm setting the direction, but she's always just raring to try to, well, no, I'm going to call the shots here. And so sometimes I just have to say, and, not hurt her, but let her know we're not doing it that way. All right? We're no different as individuals. We get into a place that feels comfortable and safe and warm, and that's where we want to stay. Though this is great. This is where I can worship God. This is where I can serve God. And yes, again, maybe it's serving a purpose, but then and there comes the time when that season and that cycle's over. God says, no, now we're going to move on. Because the other things that He has ordained will never unfold as long as we're not willing to let go of the here and now. And so, your rod and your staff comfort me. My understanding is that sometimes, that little hook that's on that staff, it's intended to jerk the sheep back onto the path we're supposed to be on. Why? Because we are like sheep. And what do sheep do? They go astray. They see something that looks good over here. They want to go investigate that. So what does our shepherd do? He jerks us back on the right path. And so this idea of your rod, your staff, they comfort me, harp strings playing. It should be more like your rod and your staff comfort me. Because you're my shepherd. And you're the one that's watching over me. And sometimes it's in green pastures and beside still waters. Sometimes it's in the valley of the shadow of death when it seems that all is against me. It says in verse 5, you prepare a table before me. Where? Not among my friends, but in the presence of my enemies. In the Hebrew there, if I were to translate it literally, it would say, those who oppose me to press me. There are those who oppose us, and their purpose is to press us. The word is zara, and if you were with us Friday night, you remember the word zarot means troubles, and it's from the root word zarar. The singular form is the word zar. Remember? And so there are those who oppose us, it says, to press us, to squeeze us, to bring troubles upon us. But yet that's the place that our shepherd prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. So sometimes our shepherd leads us, this is the way I see it, he leads us right into the presence of our enemies. But yet, always watching over us. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Surely, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell, Shevet, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, here's why I read that. For me, in the context of what we're discussing today, David is describing what it's like to go through these seasons and these cycles. There are things that have served a purpose in times past, but for what God has ordained in the future can't unfold until we're willing to allow those cycles of the past to come to an end. And unless we're willing to walk through those cycles, whether we perceive them as being good or whether we perceive them as being bound in the shadow of death. We have to trust that He is our shepherd, that He does have the ability, even in the presence of our enemies, to prepare a table for us, to anoint our head with oil. And so these cycles of life, remember the Disney movie, they had the song called The Circle of Life. Same idea. There are cycles of life. There are seasons of life. And it is our nature that when there are good seasons and good cycles, we want to hold on to them. When they're bad, from our perception, we want to run through them and hurry up and get through them. But our shepherd knows what he's doing, because it's all serving His purpose. In fact, it's supposed to be for His glory. So as an individual, I've learned that sometimes these cycles mean I have to tell certain people goodbye. Not that I planned it that way, that I even like it. It just seems to happen. When Beth and I were on staff at a church down in Florida, we had some very good friends there. At the time, people I thought would be lifelong friends, people that I thought were closer than my own kin. But as the Father began to do things in our life and changed our focus and direction and pursuing the roots of our faith, unfortunately, we kind of grew apart. Because we discovered that we no longer had as many things in common as we thought we did. And while I certainly appreciate that season of our lives and the things that we learned and what God did in our lives, there came a point in time that we had to allow all of that to come to an end. Because if we had not allowed that to come to an end, then I never would have moved to Tennessee. And all the things that God did in our life as we first began to move to Tennessee would have never happened. And consequently, for better or for worse, I wouldn't be here standing before you today. And so I've discovered in my life that one of the sad things about following God is that you have to leave people behind. You have to leave things behind. You have to leave experiences behind. Abraham, when he was Abram, God spoke to him and said this: leave your country, leave your family, leave your father's house. He had to be willing to let go of, if I can put it that way, that cycle or that season in his life. Because had he not, had he stayed in that, then we could make the argument that he could never become a friend of God. He could never be Abraham, the father of many nations. He could never be the one that is our example to follow in his footsteps, because he stayed in a situation that had to end. The same is true for us. We have to be willing, if I can put it this way, to leave country, family, father's house. We have to be willing to let go of anything that would impede us, that would restrain us, that would imprison us where we're at, and consequently never become what God has ordained us and created us to be. This same principle applies to the fellowship, the congregation. I've already kind of addressed that. It also applies to nations. If nations, how shall I say, aren't willing to allow certain things to cease and desist, then what God has intended for them can never materialize either. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But let's go over to John chapter 11. John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was sick. His name was Lazarus of Bethany, in the town of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. And when Yeshua heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, or if you'll allow me to put it this way, for my name's sake, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And so Messiah says here that this sickness that Lazarus has is not unto death. Well, wait a minute. Didn't he die? So what did he mean by that? Now later on, he says that in verse 11, our friend Lazarus sleeps. But I go that I might wake him up. And so his disciples are saying, wait a minute, if he's asleep, let him sleep. He'll get better. He'll improve. And then finally he says to them plainly in verse 14, Lazarus is dead. But again, didn't he say that this sickness is not unto death? But what was the purpose of this sickness? That God might be glorified, that the Son of God might be glorified. This is for my name's sake, so to speak. And so we know the story how that he goes to Lazarus and to Bethany, and Lazarus is resurrected from the dead. And of course, he's greeted with, if you had come on earlier, this wouldn't have happened. But now he's been dead like 4 days, and surely he's already beginning to decay. You're too late. All right, so my point here is this. Messiah said that this, what was going on, was for the glory of God. That the Son of God might be glorified through it. For his name's sake, so to speak. Mary and Martha believed that if Yeshua had showed up, that Lazarus would have never died. They had that kind of confidence in him. But things did not unfold the way they thought they should. They thought he should have come before Lazarus died. But he didn't. He didn't do it the way they thought it should be done. He didn't do it when they thought it should be done. But the way he did it got a lot more attention, didn't it? Now, could people really have foreseen that after 4 days that this man was going to be raised from the dead? My point is, they had confidence that if he had gotten there when they thought he should get there and done things the way they thought it should be done, they had confidence and trusted him that he could heal him from his sickness. But their confidence ended there. They couldn't have the trust and confidence that after 4 days, Messiah could raise him from the dead. And therein is the wisdom of the way God does things. Because he sees things from a totally different perspective than we do. His thoughts aren't our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. And so as long as he operates in a way that makes sense to us, in a time that makes sense to us, in a fashion that makes sense to us, then we can trust him for that. But if it goes beyond that, we just can't get there. But he is a man, and he knows what he's doing. And we have to be confident that as he leads us through the valley of the shadow of death, that he is still able to prepare a table for us in the presence of our enemies, that he's still able to anoint our head with oil, and that he is still able, even in that situation, to restore our soul. And it's for his name's sake that he does this. It's for his glory that he does this. And if that means that in the process we are made uncomfortable, if it pushes us to our limit, to the point where we just feel like, I'm at the end of my rope, it's probably a good thing, because we're at the end of that cycle. And when we're willing to die to that, then he can begin to allow all the things that he's intended in that next cycle to begin to unfold. So it doesn't have to happen the way we think, when we think, how we think. We just need to be confident that he's going to take us to where he wants us to go. We're going to go to Revelation 11 now. Revelation 11, verse 15. Then the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he shall reign forever and ever. Now I'm sure that all of us are looking forward to that day, when the King is upon his throne, rules from Jerusalem. The word of the Lord goes forth from Zion. The Torah goes forth from Zion. The word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So, am I right? We're all anticipating and we're all looking forward to that day. Am I right? You're scaring me. Are we all looking forward to the day when the Messiah is here ruling and reigning from Jerusalem? All right? If we mean that, then we have to embrace this. That means that all the kingdoms of this world have to cease and desist if his kingdom is going to rule and reign. And notice it doesn't say all the kingdoms of this world except one. Meaning that this nation, this kingdom, this dominion, as well as all of the other countries and nations and governments of the world, will at some point in time, even though they have served a purpose, will one day have to cease and desist. They will have to come to an end in order that the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Messiah. Which then means, as citizens of that kingdom, you and I, although I believe we should be good citizens of this country, have to understand that some of the things that we see going on right now may be an indicator of the fact that what we just read is on the horizon. Here's the challenge to you and to me, because this is what we've been comfortable with. This is what we're familiar with. And as we see things changing, and not for the better in from our perception, what is our typical response? How are we reacting to all the things that are going on in our country, politically speaking? And of course, we don't even have to address the moral issues. We know that. We don't have to expound upon that. That's obvious. But when we see all the things going on that are changing, politically speaking, and the mindset of people in power, and how we see what we all loved and revered and respected and wanted to hold on to, we see all that beginning to dissipate. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to figure out ways that we can what? Hold on to what used to be. I'm just merely suggesting to you that even though I believe we should be stalwart in our stand for righteousness and goodness and what's lawful, believe that, we also have to understand that maybe, and I will underscore that word, maybe what we're seeing is the end of one cycle. And if so, that means we've got to see this through to the end of one cycle so that whatever God has intended in the next cycle can begin to unfold. So that ultimately we can see the day when the kingdoms kingdoms of this world can become the kingdoms of our God and of His Messiah. So maybe in times past, this is kind of relative, I guess, but in times past, we've been lying in green pastures, being led by still waters. Maybe we're coming into a time that He's going to lead us through the valley of the shadow of death. Are we still going to follow Him? Are we still going to trust His leading and directing us? Or is it going to be very hard to let go of what was in order that He can bring about what is to be? For myself, I have to say that's a tough one. And I'm trying to figure out how to balance this all out in my own life. That, I believe, might be where we're at. And so what's the answer to all this? When we left Florida 18 years ago, we walked away from this position, friends, from relationships, not bitter or anything, mind you, but just realizing that God was doing something in us. We didn't exactly know what it was, to be honest with you. But when we left there, we moved to Tennessee. I had no job prospect. I had no family there. We just felt like that is where we were supposed to go, having no idea what was going to happen. In other words, we were just trusting that He was going to be there, and that He was the one actually leading us there, and that He was the one that was going to provide for us. And there were months and months and months that I was wringing my hands and beads of sweat popping up on my forehead every time I went to the checkbook and looked at what the bills were, not knowing what we were going to do. The long and short of it is, He gave us our daily bread, and He took care of us, and He provided a table for us, and He brought us through that very difficult time in our lives to a time that, well, compared to that, was still waters and green pastures. But now, today, we feel as a family that we are right back where we were 18 years ago. Except we're not backing up. We're just going through another cycle and another season where we sense that there are relationships and associations that have served a purpose, helped us to mature, helped us to get to this point. But now, once again, we feel that He is leading us through the valley, and there are shadows, and it's a very uncertain time. It's not backing up. It's not changing course. It's just that we're in this season. And when we understand that we've got to be willing to walk through this and to trust Him, even if we're not really sure what the outcome is going to be, we've got to trust that He's going to bring us through this one as well. I'm really not sure why God put this on my heart this morning. I'm not real confident that this is one of the best messages that I've ever presented. But what I'm just sharing is what's on my heart. That He does lead us through all kinds of seasons and cycles in our life. And some of them, there are no signs of encouragement anywhere we look. Everywhere we look, it looks like everything's going wrong. But we have to trust that He is indeed our shepherd. That He is doing this not to give us a hard time necessarily, but that at the end of it, we will look back and we will be able to see, and we will be able to say, I didn't do that. I didn't accomplish that. He's the one who brought us through. Amen. And because He has, now other things begin to unfold in our life, in our family, in our church. I hope, and I'm trusting, even by sharing this, that the Spirit of God put it upon my heart to do this because someone, maybe just one, needed to hear that not only does He lead us by the still waters and the green pastures, but He is the one that leads us through the valley of the shadow of death. He's the one who takes us through these seasons and cycles so that we can come into the objective and the goal. And ultimately, that's the great Shabbat. What we just read from Revelation 11 is describing to us the great Shabbat. When all of the other things and all the toil and all the labor and all of the uncertainties, all of those seasons and cycles will come to an end. It will be finished so that we can come into that time and place. And the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God, where the Messiah Himself will reign and rule from Jerusalem, and that He will be in our midst, not just in an ethereal and intangible way, that we will see Him face to face. That's the goal. And if we're going to achieve that goal, if I am going to see Him face to face, then I've got to be willing to trust that He is the one that's leading me today. Father, to the best of my ability, I'm trying to share what You placed upon my heart. Now all I can do is trust that You, by Your Spirit, will breathe upon the embers of what's been shared and cause it to blaze within those that You wanted to speak this to. Father, I pray that in all things that Your will be done, that Your name is sanctified, and that whatever we're going through in our lives as individuals and families and situations, that in the end, that You will be glorified. That we would understand that You do these things, You lead us through these things for Your name's sake. Help us to keep that before us so that we will be faithful to follow where You lead, so that we can be the people that You've called us to be. I pray for this congregation. Father, the things and the situations and the predicaments and the experiences that You have brought them through to this point. And I just pray that everybody who is part of this congregation and fellowship would somehow look beyond the things that are ultimately and are going to arise when anytime we have a group of people together, and see what You have accomplished, to see the benefit of You bringing them through the trials and the tribulations that You brought them through. And Father, I just pray, because this is what I feel in my heart, that they will continue to persevere, they will continue to press forward, that they will continue to contend, so that in the end there will be an example for this community to see what faithfulness and commitment will do. And that they will be a beacon for those that have been scattered. That they will be a beacon for those that have gone astray. That they will come into the fullness of what You've called them to be in this community. I pray for the pastor and his wife. I pray for the elders and the leadership, that they will just redouble their efforts to persevere in the face of adversity, because You have called them to something that maybe they don't even perceive just yet. Let it come to pass, Father, for Your name's sake and for Your glory. We pray this and we believe it in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen and amen. God bless you all. Have a great day.